Everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're looking into, electrokinesis.
Ooh.
Basically how flowing water can create electricity. And we've got this research paper from you. It's by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers
Oh, wow.
from 1982, and it's got some pretty cool lab experiments in it.
Cool.
So, whether you're like brushing up for a technical meeting or just curious or love geology, get ready for some aha moments.
Yeah, you might be surprised to know that this is the same phenomenon that causes those self-potential readings
Oh, really?
that geologists use in boreholes, and it even plays a role in how wells corrode over time.
Huh. I had no idea it was so widespread like that. So, to kick things off, can we just break down what electrokinesis even is?
Yeah, for sure. So, in simple terms, electrokinesis is the electric potential that is generated by fluids moving through certain materials. And this effect is particularly noticeable in porous media, like sand.
Okay.
You think of it like this.
Uh-huh.
You've got water molecules, right?
Hmm.
And they have these slight positive and negative charges.
Right.
And they're flowing over a surface that also has a charge. Okay,
Right.
let's say negative charge.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like this microscopic tug of war between the charges.
Yeah.
And that generates this electrical potential that we can actually measure.
Oh, that's a great visual. I like that. Okay, so now this Army Corps research paper,
Yeah.
it dives into some lab experiments they did to try and model electrokinesis, and their goal was to be able to predict things like water seepage in dams,
Right.
which is important.
Yeah, so their first experiment involved this massive sandbox.
Oh, wow.
It was 12 feet long,
12 feet long. That's a serious sand.
filled with layers of pea gravel and soil
Okay.
to simulate a water flow channel.
Makes sense.
But, it turns out that keeping the water flowing evenly through all that sand and gravel,
Yeah.
harder than it looks.
Yeah.
They had
yeah.
a lot of trouble with leaks and maintaining a consistent flow.
So what happened? Did they have to scrap the whole experiment?
Not quite, but they did run into a snag with their electrodes. Now, if you open a neat geophysics textbook, they'll tell you to use these special porous pot electrodes
Yeah.
to avoid electrical interference when you're measuring these streaming potentials.
Right.
But in this experiment, these fancy electrodes, they were giving them really inconsistent readings.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So they had to go back to the drawing board then?
Well, they actually stumbled on a much simpler solution.
Oh.
Maybe out of frustration or desperation,
Yeah.
they decided to try just plain old silver wires instead.
Really? Just ditch the high-tech stuff and go with silver wires.
And guess what? The silver wires worked flawlessly.
Wow.
They got stable and reliable readings.
Right.
And what's even more interesting is this actually lines up with some real-world dam surveys
Oh, okay.
where they found that simple electrodes actually worked surprisingly well.
So sometimes the simplest solution is the best, huh?
Yeah,
Sometimes.
makes me think about all the times I've overcomplicated things in my life.
Yeah, me too.
But anyway, so those textbook recommendations might need a little updating then.
Yeah, seems like it. So what did they do after this electrode breakthrough?
So they realized they needed a more controlled environment.
Oh,
So they moved on from the giant sandbox
Yeah,
to a smaller scale setup
Yeah.
using a plastic pipe.
gotcha. So downsizing for better control.
Exactly.
Tell me more about this pipe setup.
Okay, so they packed this pipe with different materials,
Okay.
sand, gravel, even crushed limestone,
Wow.
and they meticulously measured the water pressure, the flow rate,
Yeah.
and the resulting streaming potentials.
So they were really trying to tease out how all those factors were related.
Yeah, exactly. They were trying to pinpoint those relationships.
Makes sense. So did they find any other interesting things along the way?
Oh, they did. They stumbled upon something fascinating related to the zeta potential.
Ooh, zeta potential. Now that sounds
Yeah, this gets a little technical.
okay, but I'm ready.
So the zeta potential is basically a measure of the electrical charge on the surface of the material.
Okay, so we're talking about the electrical stickiness
Yeah, you got it.
of the stuff the water's flowing through.
Exactly.
So what about it?
Well, what they found is that the zeta potential wasn't constant.
Oh,
It actually changed depending on how fast the water was flowing.
really?
And this is something that textbooks hadn't really touched on before.
Huh. So the faster the water, the stronger the electrical charge on the material.
Yeah, that's what it seems like.
What's the implication of that then?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. It means that streaming potentials could be used not just to detect water flow, but also to figure out how fast it's moving.
Wow.
And that has some serious implications for things like monitoring groundwater, predicting leaks in dams, and maybe even harnessing this microelectricity for clean energy. But we'll delve deeper into that in part 2.
All right, can't wait. Welcome back to our deep dive into electrokinesis.
Glad to be back.
So we just left off with this really interesting connection between like how fast the water's flowing and the zeta potential, which again is just like the strength of the electrical charge on the surface of the materials.
Hmm.
I'm really curious to hear more about that. But first, I was wondering about all those different materials they tested in the pipe setup, like the sand,
Yes.
gravel, crushed limestone. Did they find that some materials created way more electricity than others?
That's a great question. And that's actually where things get a bit more complicated.
Uh,
You see, they could control things like the water pressure and the flow rate really well.
okay.
But there was this one variable that kept, like, throwing a wrench in the works.
Oh, what was that?
The electrical resistivity of the water itself.
Wait, so the water's resistance to electricity was changing?
Yeah.
Why would that be?
Well, a few things can affect it. Temperature plays a role, for
Right.
sure.
Okay.
And also the mineral content of the water.
I
And since they were using regular tap water for their experiments,
right.
the mineral content could fluctuate
Yeah.
depending on the treatment process and even the time of year.
Huh. So even something as simple as tap water can introduce these unexpected variables.
Exactly.
Wow. Science is tricky.
It is.
So did they find a way to like work around that?
They did. They knew that the water's electrical resistivity was a big factor.
Okay.
So they very carefully measured it
Mm-hmm.
right along with their streaming potential measurements.
Okay.
And this let them calculate the zeta potential
Got it.
and really examine its relationship to the flow rate.
Okay, so even though the raw streaming potential readings might have been a bit messy
Right.
because of the water, they could still extract good information about that surface charge.
Exactly.
That's really cool. And what's so fascinating is that they observed this relationship
Mhm.
between the zeta potential and the flow rate that had never really been described before.
Yeah, it was a pretty big deal.
So remind me, what exactly did they find about the zeta potential?
In essence, they found that the zeta potential, that surface charge,
Yeah.
seemed to increase as the water flowed faster. Yeah, it's like the faster those water molecules are rushing past the surface,
Mm-hmm.
the more they disrupt the electrical balance,
Mm-hmm.
leading to a greater zeta potential.
You know what that makes me think of those static electricity experiments we all did in school?
Oh, yeah.
Like rubbing a balloon on your hair to create that static charge. The faster you rub, the stronger the charge, right? Like maybe it's like a similar principle at play here, just at a much smaller scale.
I love that analogy.
On teams.
It really highlights how, like, fundamental electrokinesis is.
Yeah.
It's all about charges and motion interacting, whether we're talking about balloons and hair or water molecules and sand grains.
That's awesome. So we've got this really interesting connection between how fast the water's flowing and the strength of that surface charge. But like, what's the bigger picture here? Why
Yeah.
should we care about what's happening at this tiny microscopic level?
That's the million-dollar question.
It is.
And that's precisely what we'll be exploring in part 3 of our deep dive.
Ooh.
We're going to look at what these findings might mean for managing our water resources,
Okay.
predicting leaks, and maybe even harnessing this microelectricity for clean energy.
Right.
Get ready for some seriously mind-expanding possibilities.
I am ready. Okay, so we're back for the final part of our electrokinesis deep dive.
Here we go.
And I am so ready to like really have my mind blown here.
Let's do it.
We've talked about how like moving water creates electricity.
Right.
And the faster it flows, the stronger the electrical charge gets.
Hmm.
But how do we actually use this knowledge? Like, how do we put it to work?
Well, that's where things get really exciting, because if we learn to accurately measure and interpret these streaming potentials,
Right.
it could really open up a whole new world of possibilities for managing our water resources.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of like real world applications are we talking about here?
Well, let's start with groundwater.
Okay.
Imagine being able to, like, map the flow of groundwater deep beneath our feet,
Mm-hmm.
not just knowing it's there, but seeing how fast it's moving and in what direction.
That's incredible.
This would be a game changer for everything from sustainably managing aquifers to predicting where contamination might spread.
Wow. That's like having X-ray vision for
Oh.
the Earth's plumbing.
Exactly.
And what about those dams that we were talking about earlier?
Oh, yeah. When it comes to dam safety, this technology could be huge.
Okay.
We could use these streaming potential measurements to detect tiny leaks or weak spots in the structure
Right.
long before they become major problems.
Wow.
It could completely revolutionize how we monitor and maintain these really important pieces of infrastructure.
That's incredible. Preventing catastrophic dam failures is like
Yeah,
a massive deal, could even save lives.
absolutely.
What other potential applications are there?
Well, some researchers believe that electrokinesis could even play a role in generating clean energy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
If we could harness the electrical potential created by water flowing naturally in rivers and streams,
Right.
we might be able to tap into a sustainable and renewable energy source.
Now that's what I'm talking about.
I know.
Harnessing the power of flowing water to like power our homes and cities. That sounds like straight out of a sci-fi novel.
It does, but the scientific foundation is there.
Wow.
Of course, there are still challenges, too. We need to develop more sensitive sensors and better ways to interpret the data before these applications become like a reality. But the potential is enormous.
It really is. It's mind-boggling to think that a single research paper from over 40 years ago could be the spark
I know.
for like such groundbreaking innovations.
It's amazing.
It really highlights the power of scientific curiosity and how important it is to support like fundamental research.
Couldn't agree more. And it's a great reminder that knowledge is most valuable when we share it,
Yeah.
when we discuss it, and challenge each other's ideas.
Absolutely.
That's what this deep dive is all about.
It is.
Connecting the dots between research and real-world applications and empowering you with knowledge that has the potential to change the world.
Well said. Speaking of empowering our listeners, I have like one final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
Before we wrap up, we've talked about harnessing the electricity created by flowing water.
Right.
But what about going in the opposite direction? Could we actually use electricity to control the flow of water itself?
That's a brilliant question.
Thank you.
It takes us into the realm of something called electroosmosis.
Electroosmosis.
Yeah, where you apply electrical currents to manipulate how fluids move through porous materials.
Whoa.
It's already being used in some niche applications, like cleaning up contaminated soil,
Okay.
removing water from construction sites, but who knows what the future holds?
Yeah.
Maybe one day we'll be able to like precisely control water flow with electricity, guiding it exactly where we need it most.
Now, that's a mind-blowing thought to end on.
Right.
We've gone from these microscopic interactions between water molecules and sand grains to imagining a future where we can harness and control the flow of water with electricity.
It's pretty amazing.
What an electrifying journey this has been.
It really has. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into electrokinesis.
Of course.
We hope you've enjoyed the ride and come away with a newfound appreciation for this really fascinating phenomenon.
And as always, if you have any thoughts or questions about today's deep dive or suggestions for future topics you'd like us to explore, please don't hesitate to share them with us.
Yeah, we love hearing from you.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep into the world of knowledge.
See you next time.